All right, well, welcome everyone. We're so glad that a few of you stuck around. How many are from the East Coast? How many from Central? Are y'all's stomachs doing like mine? It's like, dang, it's got to be dinner time, doesn't it? So we're going to do our best to give you a nice, stimulating conversation for the next 40 minutes. For some of you, this is your first session in this room. For others, you've sat here now, like me, for 4 sessions. Well, we've been talking about competency-based education. And so in this session, we're really going to talk about what does it mean to personalize learning? What does it mean to adjust the way in which we do education based on what this one particular learner needs and what you need and you need and you need? If you had just been in this room and listened to the student panel, and they all had slightly different needs, and at least in competency-based education, as I hope you do in traditional forms of education, we really try to take that individual learner needs into account. Today on this panel, we have 4 different individuals that come at personalization in different ways, but all have a desire to try to meet learners where they are in the right way, and so I'm excited to be able to introduce our panelists. Dr. Linda Crismon is joining us. Linda is the Director of Learning Experience Design for Unicon. See the Unicon team over there, so hello to Unicon. Glad to have you with us. We have Drew, and I'm supposed to do it with my hands, Magliozzi, joining us today. Drew is the CEO of Mainstay, and if you're not familiar with Mainstay, he's going to share you a little bit about his organization. Next up is David Daniels. David is the president of Acadeum. Acadeum offers a great way for learners to personalize their journey by choosing where they take some classes inside of a consortial relationship. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And then Brad Baumgartner, did I do it okay, as well as your children? Better. Okay, good. Is the executive vice president and general manager of Learnosity. And so over the next few minutes, we're just going to share a little bit about their perspectives around personalization. So I think we should start with user experience design, right? This learner experience design. How we create experiences, how we create that learning journey. And let me make sure everybody gets, when I talk about a learning journey, it's everything that goes into getting a learner from where they are to where that learner needs to be in order to earn that credential. And some of that could be student services, some of that can be the academic side of the house, but it's the things that we do across that learning experience. So Miss Learner Experience Design here. Dr. Crismon, talk to me a little bit about the elements of personalization, about what does it look like to truly personalize that learning experience?
So the first thing I think about when you say personalized learning journey is putting the learners first, right? That's the first thing I think about. And then, of course, I recognize that learning is holistic. So I have to think about the cultural, social, emotional, as well as academic components. So when I think about that, I think about Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, right? And Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. And I mean, of course, other educational psychological theories also apply, but then I have to first think about students' physiological needs, clothing, food, and shelter, their safety needs, psychological and physical. And then I have to think about where they are in that learning journey. So if I pair them with competencies that are too easy, they're going to tune out. If I pair them with competencies that are too difficult, they're going to get lost. So I need to meet them in that ZPD zone so that I meet them where they are and I take them from there. And then I also think about that learners bring their own unique background, their own unique perspective to every learning experience. They are at different levels in the same journey. And so this is why it's very important to personalize it. Now, having said all this, having taught in higher education nationally and internationally for 20 years, the one thing that I can tell you, once you feel as an academic that I'm there, I can develop those amazing personalized journeys, you have to start all over again. technology changes, new educational theories emerge, students' generational needs change, a pandemic happens, and then you start all over. And so this is why I believe that my work at Unicon is so important, because I get to help clients across multiple industries personalize and optimize their learning experiences. So the one thing that I can say is there is no formula. Every single student, as we just saw, is different, and every personalized learning experience is different. And if you ask me, and if you ask Charla, we're going to give you maybe 2 different answers, because it means different things to different people. So tying it all back to design, when you mention design, I have to think about UDL, Universal Design for Learning. I have to think about giving students a choice and a voice. So I have to have my teaching has to be flexible so that students can express how they want to learn. And they have to choose how do they want to learn it. Like you have to, this includes instruction, delivery, modality. Another thing I think of is accessibility. So I have to develop learning that I have to help learners who cannot read, learners who cannot see, hear. But this also helps learners who do not have a disability go back and review the lesson. And then I also think about content. It has to be contextual. It has to have social emotional elements. It has to align with students' culture, language, age. Finally, voice. When I give my students a voice, I empower them. You want to empower students, let them take ownership of their own learning. So to sum it, this is my view.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. And we had planned to go to Drew, but I'm going to pop down to you, so give you just a heads up that I'm heading to you. You and I had a conversation earlier today about accessibility and about assessment and about, really thinking about personalizing learning means meeting the learner where they are with what they need in order to thrive. Talk to me a bit about assessment, the work you do at Learnosity. Talk to me about how you all develop that kind of assessment competence, if you would, to really meet the needs of all learners, to figure out what they need, and then how do you get at that?
Yeah, so thank you. Actually, when you were looking down here, I wasn't sure which of us it was, but when you said assessment,
for sure it was coming to you.
So I'm here because I bring a K-12 perspective, I think, which is maybe unique on this panel. When I think about things like accessibility, I think about inclusiveness in testing. I think about providing every test taker with equal opportunity to be successful. And we at Learnosity provide a set of APIs that allows folks like Unicon and others to assemble tests that are inclusive. We take very seriously our obligation around things like WCAG compliance and 508 for students with disabilities. Sharp focus on these areas. Our approach is to provide our partners with the tech stack and the skill set to do these things.
So what does that look like to really give equal opportunity to all learners to do well, right? I mean, we were having that conversation this morning, Brad, about equal opportunity to all learners. Well, for some, they had the exact same test. Isn't that same thing as equal opportunity?
The answer is no. So for us, that means delivering things like adaptive tests, right? Whether that be an item level adaptive, a form level adaptive, tests that adjust with the learner and serves up appropriate content.
Yeah. So that personalization, and thinking not just about the personalization around the services, the supports that we offer, but even thinking about the way in which we approach our assessment design, the delivery of that assessment, et cetera. I'll come back to you in a minute on data. Let's talk, Drew, just a minute about the work that you all do. It was funny, on the panel before this, a student made the comment about they were hounding me. It was almost like they hounded me all the time. Like they wanted to make sure I was getting my stuff done. So talk to us a little bit about what you do and how you help kind of personalize and craft those messages so that learners stay engaged in that process, in the learning process.
Thanks, Charla. Yeah, the name of the game is engagement, and we think it's utterly important to meet students where they are. At the library. No, not the library, I'm sorry. On their mobile phones, because that's where we spend all of our time, and actually specifically in their text messages. It's the most democratizing form of communication we have. It's where most of us communicate with our friends and loved ones. And there's an incredibly high bar to being allowed to participate in that conversation, particularly with Gen Z. And so it really starts with building trust. And we do that by sitting on top of data systems, providing them with informational nudges when they need them, answering their questions with relevant information when they have them, even if it's at 2 in the morning, because we have a system powered by artificial intelligence, and also infusing equity and empathy into the process, as well as context and community, because really it has to be an inclusive conversation that builds trust at all times. And when you do this, a really amazing thing happens. Well, you don't have to wait for students to be on a panel to ask them insightful questions. You can ask your entire student body or subsets of the community a question like, how are you doing? And get 50, 60, 70, sometimes more percent of the students responding, usually within a matter of minutes. And what you do with that information is really actually the next step, because the technology enables you to listen at scale, but really the best leaders and educators take that information, they look at it, and they respond to it with an action plan as quickly as possible. It's not waiting for a long turnaround time after running a Qualtrics survey. This is something you can do in an afternoon. You can get the data, and you can respond accordingly. You say, we heard you, you said this, and here's what we're going to do about it.
So let me just tie the two of you together. So when we think about that universal design, we think about using a real learner-centered approach. We're embedding in opportunities to, in real time, communicate. It almost, and correct me if I'm wrong, automates something that manually a faculty member might be sitting there individually sending notes, but we could automatically generate those. That allows them then to go deeper in relationship in other ways or in follow-up to that. So it's a marrying of these two concepts as you're building out kind of that learner experience, but also the student services side. Is that right?
Yeah, you pretty much nailed it. One distinction I like to say is we're not building robots. We are actually building an Iron Man suit for communication. And it allows an exceptional educator to man the tool and have a conversation at scale with a lot more people than you could ever imagine doing so otherwise. Yeah. And when you do that, it actually takes that exceptional educator and can magnify the outcomes they're capable of having. And the key is that a robot answer is not always the solution. Right. It can help lighten the load, but it also creates work, often high leverage work. Yeah, it's like the student who says, I'm dropping out. Well, there's nothing a bot's gonna say to solve that situation. You've gotta have a face-to-face conversation.
But at least the bot identified that we have a student who's thinking about dropping out, right?
100%.
And now I need to plan an intervention that's gonna bring that person back, right? And I think that's interesting. There are a lot of times we'll get this question about a faculty member's role in a CBE program, because we try to use technologies like what we're talking about today so we can enable more substantive, more authentic, deeper relationship between the people part and using that technology to drive the human touch. So I appreciate that so much. David, you at Acadeum, it seems like saw a need for the fact that a lot of times classes are full. People want something their institution doesn't offer. We didn't talk about this, but when I was in college, I wanted to go on the Walt Disney World College program, and you couldn't do that from my institution. You could only go from certain institutions, and I was trying to figure out how to go to school at another institution. You've kind of figured out a way at Acadeum to allow learners that want to personalize their journey beyond what their institution offers by allowing them to engage in coursework from other institutions that are still of quality. Talk to me a little bit about how that personalization works through the Acadeum process.
Sure. So it's less about content, obviously. And I built a lot of product that had personalization to it through formative assessment,
Sure.
what have you. But I'll draft off what Linda was saying. It's more about a voice around scheduling. So it's personalization of scheduling. And, if we all can kind of harken back to our college careers, I think all of us would raise our hand if I posed a question of how many times could you not get the course that you needed when you needed it? It happens to everybody. It still happens today, and it's still hard to believe. But by the power of collaboration and a network of like-minded institutions where course equivalencies are agreed upon before they go into an inventory of available courses, and so that's what Acadeum does. We give very high flexibility and personalization and a voice to students who, either need to take a semester off or a half a semester off because, they have a sick family member, or a military student who's deployed, right? Or, candidly, a student who's trying to avoid a faculty member who's notorious for being problematic or very difficult, right? And they're just not getting it, so it doesn't meet his or her need. So again, it does speak volumes to the flexibility, the voice, and the personalization around class scheduling. And the statistics will bear this out about, let's see, 25-30% of students who do drop out of college between freshman and sophomore year. One of the reasons, not the sole reason, is because they can't get the course when they needed it, okay, or they're trying to avoid a professor. And so that's a little bit more anecdotal and less objective, but we do a lot of surveying and what have you. So again, that's kind of how we see personalization, at least through Acadeum, is again through like-minded institutions who agree ahead of time on what course equivalencies look like, and then give that flexibility and that voice to the student so he or she can kind of manage in their own college career, so to speak, and help kind of get over some impediments and problems that they might be facing.
And I'm assuming it helps sell empty seats at one institution, right, to somebody else as well. And
That's
I mean, that
exactly
can
right.
be.
It's kind of like a hotels.com, or a
Yeah.
hotels tonight. It's like,
Yep.
okay. And so schools can see what's available, on a network there, and one institution can kind of, make up its mind that, yes, this is a great price for my student, and I'm going to buy it. And typically the supplying institutions we have, I hate to sound so commercial, but the teaching institutions are folks who do online quite well. Okay,
Yep.
so they've been doing it for a long time. They know how to hyper-service a student. They're engaging with technologies such as what Drew's is, and maybe not all the time, but they have some form or function around, nudging and reminding and being in front of that student and making sure they do it quite well. So it's typically a good experience for the student.
Yeah. Your two objections make me think a little bit about what some of the benefits we would say of competency-based. First one's about time. I couldn't get the class when I needed it, or I needed to stop for a little bit for something, but I don't really want to stop out, but I had to.
Exactly.
And then the second is about avoiding a faculty member who you think holds the standards too much. If we're all aligned to the same performance-based standard, everybody, regardless of teachers, should be able to do that. So
Exactly. And just one more quick example, too, around voice and flexibility is that we have courses on our network where you might be taking an introductory marketing course, Marketing 200 course, but there's one university or two or three, we've got a customer in the audience here who've literally embedded some Coursera certifications within the actual coursework.
Great.
So you're not only leaving with 3 credit hours, but now you actually have a credentialed skill. So you get a meta certificate from Facebook, or you get a HubSpot designation or something
That's
like
great.
that. So again, when you give students that voice and that power, it's like, I don't want just that marketing course. I want something more from it. When they see it's available, we live in an Amazon world, right? And we live with a generation of students who are growing up thinking that flexibility exists in every domain. And higher ed's not one of them just yet, but we're getting there.
that differentiation is absolutely important. And I want to ask, so y'all are aware where I'm going next, I'm going to ask you a question about data and how we can leverage data. But when we think about personalization, that differentiation, what do we need, right? What would it take in order to really up our game with regard to personalization or really differentiating learning according to each learner? What is it that we as a field could really use? The first thing I often think of is data, and back to Brad. Data is something that you all do well, and being able to collect data at really minute levels and more globally and across subgroups and the whole group and all of that. Talk to me a little bit about how you see data driving that kind of personalization.
Yeah, first, actually, I'd like to just touch on something
Please,
around
feel free.
the time-based notion. So in K-12, we've been very, we're time-boxed because of accountability rules. And I think there's been some significant improvement as of late around the replacement for the No Child Left Behind Act. So Every Student Succeeds affords us the opportunity in K-12 to do some things differently that really do lend themselves to a competency-based approach. And I think as a result, you'll see hopefully a pretty rapid evolution to more through-year, through-course assessment, less emphasis on the end-of-year sort of summative assessments, and really a framework that allows us to move to a more competency-based, less time-boxed K-12 framework.
Yeah.
But you wanted me to talk about data.
But that's good. I mean, I think you're right. Anytime we can move out of a time-based container, it's helpful for learners, right? They can either move faster or move slower based on what their individual needs are. So the more we can divorce ourselves, I hate that word, but the more we can separate ourselves from the time container, the better off we, I think, find ourselves for differentiation.
It's also an equity issue.
It is
right?
a huge equity issue.
Childcare and, having a full-time job, like fitting education into the keyhole of life is very difficult. So optimal flexibility is key.
Yeah, like, are you going to show up for class, or are you going to take it from one of your online providers? Those are all big issues, big design challenge issues as well. Yeah, absolutely. From a data standpoint, I didn't let you off the hook. I'm coming back to you, my friend. Yeah, you hoped, but I'm right back at you.
So we have a Learnosity product manager in the group, so I'm really fearful that I'm going to say something inaccurate, incorrect. So Kate, if you could. So we do, on average, 3 million-ish or so. We deliver about 3 million assessments a day. We deliver at scale globally. We collect an awful lot of data. We report at individual levels. So we provide back individual student reports. We provide sort of large cohort reports, so district level and beyond. Learning outcomes reports. We also ship data to our partners who want to do their own reporting. Data is an extremely important part of what we do. I think as an industry, and we were talking about this a little earlier, I think there's actually a question coming later, but I'm going to answer it now just because I like to go out of turn. I think we need to focus more on assessment literacy in the back end. We've not done a great job talking about assessment literacy and we spend an awful lot of time developing tests. We spend an awful lot of time making sure that things are put through bias and sensitivity reviews and that they meet psychometrician standards. We spend far less time on the back end educating learners and parents around where they are specifically on their learning journey and how we can help them improve and where their areas of deficiency are. So that's something I hope as an industry we start to really contemplate a little bit more than we have.
So let's talk a little bit about that. So, and certainly from a user experience design, a learner gets some sort of a scorecard that said, don't have it, not yet, or mastered. How do they interpret that, right? It's part of that question. How do we give feedback in such a way that that learner who just got a, you're not quite there yet, knows what they need to do in order to get to there? And if we're working in a K-12 context, really thinking about how parents can support that learner and understanding specifically what does this ETS report on the standardized test actually mean to me, and how can I remediate with my child, right?
To me, it all goes back to who are your learners? Who are the parents? I mean, my students at ASU, because I teach there as well, I'm actually teaching a research graduate course right now. And one student is doing her research, her capstone project on communication with parents, or lack of. So how do you communicate with these parents? How can you get to them and explain what that scorecard, do they at least want to know? Or would they get it? And, you know, and so the student, her research, she was trying to show that if she advocates positive communication, it would help the child in K through 12. But with these parents, the first thing they would say is, why are you calling me? What did my child do? And no, they did great. Oh, my child could not do great. But they did. And so, again, personalizing, you have to understand who they are, who are their parents, and then adaptive assessment, because it's not going to work. What works for one student with one school might not work for another student in another school. So even in the same class, I should say. So it differs widely.
And think about that from a faculty. How many faculty members do we have in the room? Like, I'm supposed to run 18 different tests for this one section or 18 different approaches, and how am I going to track all of that, and how does that all work out? Not so easy, right? But we have to have technology to enable that. We look a little bit, and I don't want this, and we've talked a lot about the products and the things that you all do. What is it that, when it comes to personalization, what is it that we need to really up our game when we think about allowing a learner to self-direct, to choose their pathway, to be able to change our approach according to a particular learner? What is it we need? What should we all be thinking about?
In my experience, actually, it's not upping our game even so much as getting simpler. I've been stunned in our platform how if you just ask students what they need, they'll be pretty damn honest with you. Just most of the time, they're not being asked. And then the key is when you ask and they tell you, you've got to listen, and you've got to respond and make sure they know they're heard and do something about it. That's the hard part. But they're almost never asked, which is the unfortunate truth. So it's actually, you don't need to create some grand system to do this. It's usually pretty darn simple. Doing it at scale becomes hard. And doing it, in personalized journeys where maybe it's a competency-based education course and there are 100 people going through it and they're doing it self-paced, so they're hitting different milestones. And that is a tricky problem that technology can help solve, but it starts with asking the question, which is something we don't often do.
That's a good point. I think if I look at just higher ed as a domain, you're looking at, folks who are teaching, learners of 18 to whatever now, but 99% of them are domain experts, right? They've never had an ounce of teaching experience or professional development. And I think all of us could raise our hand and remember who our best teacher ever was, whether it happened in college or high school or grade school. So, to me personally, I'm not saying people are tone deaf, I'm not saying that whatsoever, but they don't know what they don't know. So unless you really make professional development a requirement around basic classroom management, learning in the brain, diversity, right, and you're teaching college faculty that they need to embrace this, right, but that's the last thing that's ever thought of in terms of, especially with adjuncts. 65% of all courses are still taught by adjunct faculty in this country, and most of the time they have full-time jobs somewhere else if it's at a community college. So how good is the instruction if you can't recognize the student who needs more diverse path, right, or has more diverse needs? You're basically templatizing the learning. You're a talking head or an empty suit, for lack of a better way of putting it. So to be empathetic and sympathetic to where that learner is, but you have to give them the tools, and it's not their fault. We just don't put enough emphasis on it.
Templatizing learning. It's a great line, right? Same thing, semester after semester, person after person, looks the same. How do we really take that template and throw it out and really personalize that? You have any other thoughts on that?
In one word, caring. You have to care about your learners. When you care, that's when it becomes personal. When you understand what their needs are, that's when you can help them. When they come to you struggling, it could be in the beginning of a journey, it could be in the middle of a journey, it could be at the end. In the beginning, it could be, can I do this? You need to be there to let them know, yes, you can. You can push them. You need to tell them, I've got you. I'm going to support you. In the middle of the journey, what did I get myself into? They start to feel overwhelmed. At the end, assessment is coming. Am I going to be able to pass? You have to be there for them. You have to care enough to push them. And when you do, in the previous session I attended, and at the very end, he said something, this is why we teach. This is why we are in higher education, for those moments like what that girl said. This is why we teach.
The fact that folks view assessment is coming, nobody likes the doctor, but we all go to the doctor to get a checkup, right? So assessment is our doctor visit. We're simply checking in to see how we're doing within our learning journey. And I think if there's one hope, it's that I think the pandemic was horrible. We did a lot of things really poorly, but we did some things really well. And I think what we did learn throughout the pandemic is, and I hope we don't lose sight of this. I think there was a sharper focus on the individual, because we didn't have folks sitting in a classroom in brick and mortar seats, and we didn't treat them all similarly. And I think we really started to appreciate that individuals do learn differently. And I hope we don't revert back. I see us in a hybrid world going forward. I don't see us going back to entirely brick and mortar. I see it being some sort of hybrid, and I hope the lessons learned from the pandemic around individuals learning differently, wrapping social and emotional support around learners, and paying more, frankly, attention to that than we had at any time in the past. I hope that's not lost on us.
So I hear kind of some key takeaways, some things that institutions should be doing, right? If we were to sum up your key takeaway, what I wish institutions would do, I think I heard you say, just ask.
Yeah, listen, yeah, for sure.
And then if you listen, you have to do something about it. That's the hard part, which takes the heart to care enough to actually receive what you just heard and do something about it. To be able to take feedback that you give on an assessment and make that feedback approachable so that that learner wants to continue to grow and gain the kind of knowledge and skills and abilities they need to be successful. To be able to say to a learner, there's more options, right? And don't let a single choice of where you go limit your ability to be able to expand your horizons. What other kind of key takeaways would you have about strategies for personalizing a learning journey for people who are thinking, how could I differentiate? You have any thoughts or strategies that you would like to recommend?
Me personally, I'm really big on coaching, so non-cognitive coaching, and unfortunately, there's not a lot of money out there, and a professor can't do everything. And I'll speak more to higher ed because that's been most of my life. But if we, in a perfect world, every student, especially an at-risk student, or a first-gen student, or any, and obviously learners of all demographics, flame in and flame out. But when you have somebody that's motivating you and constantly, watching what you're doing and reminding you and coaching you, and when you do say, hey, I need to quit because of this, and have that person empathetically say, now you need this more than ever. Let me get you the resources you need. Let me figure this out for you. Almost like an ambassador for you. Yeah. And it works. I ran a couple online program management companies, and we did it obviously for economic reasons, but also for for good reasons too. We want everybody to be productive and happy when they're done. But it makes such a difference. It really does.
Do you mind if I share something?
I would love that.
We recently did this with our product in a course with a high DFW rate, D meaning students who get a D and F or withdraw. And we'd planned to do this as a randomized control trial, with as much scrutiny as possible in an in-person class, and then COVID. So suddenly we're doing it in an online class, and we did this exact thing. And you can actually, the principles of coaching are actually just asking really great questions. Exactly. And it can be done in a non-human way. And obviously it needs to be rooted in the individuals, but we have got some amazing results doing this. We boosted the likelihood someone would get a B or higher by about 16%. And the bulk of the benefit went to first-generation students who on average got a full letter grade better. So the average for the control group was a 64, and the average for the treatment was a 75. And this is enormous because this was in a Georgia State University. Not only does that mean they have a far likelier path to graduation, but also grades are money in that state. If you drop below a 3.0 GPA, you're going to lose your Georgia Hope Scholarship, which means you're probably not going to be able to pay for college and you're going to drop out. So GPA equates to dollars. And the benefits also were for sophomore students and students with low academic achievement in high school. So really the people who seem to benefit most are those who have the least foundation for being college ready.
And what was the intervention that they needed? Was it the coaching, or you said we did a?
Oh, it was basically our product, which gave a virtual coach. And it basically checked in 3 times a week. One was a digest on, hey, here's what's coming up this week that you got to expect. The other was a little quiz. We just asked him, hey, lecture was today. Here was a quick question on what you learned. And then there would be also these metacognitive skills and things like that, mostly on growth mindset, which is, the struggle is actually when the learning takes place. And we're also able to tap into the LMS. So if you hadn't done your reading yet, we knew. Or if you missed the deadline to upload your homework assignment, we'd say, hey, Charla, you missed the deadline. But here's the deal. You still have 24 hours to get partial credit. So the professor really wants you to do well. So
And that's automated.
It's all automated, yeah.
So that's what we're talking about, ways that you can use technology to power things that a faculty member might normally be monitoring. If you listen to Paul or you listen to another session and they're like, I'm supporting 200 learners, you're like, how the heck are they doing 200 learners? Well, they're doing it because they have technology, they're using data, they're using technology to be able to allow them then to show the heart to the right students at the right time in the right way. But you got to have the tools in order to be able to do that personalization. Is that fair?
Yeah, we're at the dawn of the age when the promise of personalization is actually becoming more real than ever.
The dawn of the age of personalization.
We've been talking about it for 30 years, but now the technology and the data is to the point where, we can actually fulfill the promises we made 30 years ago.
That's right. I also think that's part of why this is ed on the edge of mass adoption for CBE, because we've been talking these things for a long time, but now the technology, the interest, all that seems to be right there. And I hope those of you that are thinking CBE are thinking personalization, right? How do I differentiate? How do I make this real for each learner? David, you look like you wanted to add something.
To append to what you said too, the generation is there, right? We have a generation now, people who grew up much differently than I did, obviously. I'm an old dog, but at the end of the day,
with cute socks, I might add.
I think to the same high school at the same time. You're not that old.
That's he graduated 4 years after I did, so you speak for yourself, Brad. But I bet you remember the best teacher there at Chittard.
They actually went to the same high school and met when they were doing panel prep. Isn't that kind of cool? Anyway.
ASU+GSV miracle.
It's a small world after.
Sure
okay.
It sure is. But again, the generation is right. So, and it's not just this generation, because I was of that. I took 2 correspondence courses at Indiana University, and they changed the rule because I submitted 16 papers in one day. Okay, but that's how I learned, right? That's how I was a prolific writer, so couldn't do much else well. But again, why aren't we allowing students to advance at their own speed, their own pace, and what have you? But so I would have been a great learner at Western Governors or SNOOS program or Northern Arizona's. I would have been the sprinter that got through stuff quickly and wanted to apply it quicker. It doesn't mean I'm any dumber or any better than anybody else, but at the end of the day, it's this generation will propel. It'll be the velocity we need, around really impactful change and sustainable change.
That's great.
From our perspective, to optimize the personalized learning journey, there are 3 components.
Okay.
Learning experience, design, and engineering. So that's the content. How do you deliver the content, interactive activities, everything there. Content management and strategy, how are we going to deliver it? And then learner analytics, to see what we did right, what we did wrong, and how can we improve to make informed decisions. So these are the 3 components that basically guide our world whenever we look at personalized learning experiences.
Absolutely.
In fact, do you mind if I add one thing is, I also view it as a moral imperative.
Amen.
Because the very technology that we're talking about is also being applied in industry and in the corporate world, and is likely going to be a tsunami of job displacement in the next decade. We were lucky, actually, to have experienced it during COVID, because it's coming again. And it's not to say there won't be new jobs created. There most assuredly will. But we as a society need to be using those same technologies to accelerate the pace of upskilling and reskilling, because we are going to have a massive population shift, and the jobs of today will not be here a decade from now. And we have to educate people with as much velocity as we possibly can to get them to where they need to be for the future of, you know, their own well-being as well as society as a whole. It's a huge opportunity.
Absolutely.
And again, if we don't do it, we are in deep shit.
And on deep shit, I plan to leave this panel. So with that, we're right out of time, and I think that should be the last line for this panel. To those watching at home, if only you had been here, you too could have been in deep shit. So thank you for taking some time to talk about the work you do, how you allow learners to personalize, how you allow us as faculty to think about our role in different ways, and how by leveraging technology we can really make that difference in the lives of learners. So thank you all very much. We appreciate your time today.
Thanks, Charla.